The miracle in our universe. All of the life forms known to mankind exist nowhere but here, our home planet, the Earth. Our dream of conquering space has come true. The International Space Station, ISS, the largest technological project ever undertaken. People have been living in this outpost of humankind without interruption since the year 2000. So far, more than 100 astronauts have lived, worked, and researched here under unique conditions.
What fascinated me was most of it the beauty of the planet Earth. It's a beautiful planet, fantastic colors. The Bahamas are beautiful, the Australian outback, the Tibet, we have really very nice places. But it also is fragile. If you look beside the planet, you see the blackness of space and this thin atmosphere. You feel that it is vulnerable, fragile.
What fascinates me about space travel is that it's the frontier, the final frontier we face as human beings, and it's out there waiting for us. We don't know what's beyond it. I feel the way people probably used to feel when they stood on the beach and looked out at the ocean and asked themselves, what's beyond the horizon?
Houston, Texas, historic, even legendary location. This is NASA's Johnson Space Center. The conquest of space began here in 1961. It's now the starting point for Alexander Gerst's biggest adventure. The young German astronaut will fulfill his lifelong dream in 2014. This is when he becomes the third German to travel to the International Space Station. We will follow him around the world as he completes the world's most exclusive training program, so his dream can come true.
So I'm going to translate out the cedar rail to the starboard side of the truss.
Copy.
Translating out to the exposed platform again.
Copy, heading out to the exposed platform. Yeah, I see you are at the end cone handrail. Okay, so you're translating.
It looks like a computer game, but it's really survival training at the NASA Virtual Reality Lab.
There's no handrails here. Oh, it looks like I must have come up away from structure. Looks like my safety tether is not connected or adrift.
This is the worst nightmare, to be flung away from the space station, out of control.
Okay, I'm going to deploy the safer. Deploy the right side of my handle. Take the module out. There it is. And I switch to on. The column is in view. And I will use positive pitch to get back at the point in the middle that I want to go back to, and I give it a positive impulse plus X. I think I can see my rate slowing down and coming back towards.
Okay, copy. I see you coming back. You
aiming for the exposed platform.
copy. You have plenty of GN2 at this point.
Want me to brake?
I do.
Okay, slowing down.
And you're out of GN2.
All right. And I'm waiting for the handrails here. And I got it.
Copy capture.
I'm glad that I reached back to the station. I'm glad that's just a simulation.
Great job.
Thanks.
Alexander Gerst is a modern-day adventurer, a man of scientific precision, and a passionate fencer. Speed, discipline, and strict rules, characteristics that are essential to an astronaut. Each competition also involves learning to respect the opponent.
That's all I was to do. Das war nicht fast gemein.
Building 9 at NASA in Houston is where Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin prepared for the moon landing. It now houses a full-scale model of the ISS. Alexander Gerst will fly to the ISS in 2014, along with U.S. astronaut Greg Weissman.
All that stuff over here, and then you've got partial pressures.
Because they are essential to life, water and oxygen are precious on board. An ingenious system recycles nearly all of the oxygen on board and even 85% of the water in urine.
This would just be a standard 2D connection on this side.
Alexander Gerst is using this simulator to learn to control a huge robotic arm.
And then delete the camera status. And therefore you.
On the space station, he will perform this task in the cupola, the station's observation tower. From here, it's also possible to watch Soyuz capsules and ATV cargo carriers dock onto the space station. Mission Control. This is the iconic center in the history of American space exploration.
History from the past.
Milt Heflin is an old veteran of NASA. He took part in the Apollo program. The original control room from those days is an almost sacred site for him.
We have entered the cathedral of human spaceflight operations. I hope you can feel the cathedral. Yeah. Oh, this is, absolutely. When I come in this room, I've worked in this room as a flight controller and a flight director. And I mean, you're in the room where we landed on the moon for the very first time, July 20th, 1969. And all the landings that took place were controlled from mission control right here in this room. Let me tell you about the American flag that hangs over here in the corner. It has been to the moon and back. It flew to the moon on the command service module, stayed in the command service module in lunar orbit, stayed there.
Apollo 17.
Apollo 17, and then and brought back here and hung in mission control.
I think when you enter this room as a young astronaut, you immediately get goosebumps, because it's really the closest place on Earth to the moon landing. Just imagining that all the stories I've known since I was little took place right here in this room, and of course also in a spaceship, that's a fantastic experience.
What's so special about this room? It all has to do with the people. I mean, that's what this is all about. It's a matter of the camaraderie and the family feeling and the teamwork. That's a word that, I mean, it really happens in this room. I mean, people in this room want to succeed. It shows you that when you have the support and the dedication and the commitment, you can do almost anything you set your mind to. And that's what I enjoy about being in mission control.
My grandfather was a ham radio operator with a little room in the basement where there was always equipment humming, all kinds of radios and antennas and buttons and knobs. When I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, I was fascinated by it. One day, I think I was about 6, he somehow managed to focus the antenna on the moon and send radio waves that reflected off the surface of the moon and returned to his antenna, all the way back to the Earth. He let me talk into the microphone, and 2.5 seconds later, that's the speed of light and also how long it takes for radio waves to travel there and back, I heard my own voice, very distorted on the radio. For me, as a 6-year-old, that was incredible. It was as if a little part of me had been to the moon and back.
The world's largest operational space launch facility, the Cosmodrome in Baikonur, Kazakhstan. A huge giant, 50 meters long and weighing more than 300 tons, stands against the cold night sky. This is a place of legend. Top secret during the Cold War, this is where the very first man-made satellite, the Sputnik, was shot into space in 1957. In 1961, the first human, Yuri Gagarin, traveled into space from this launch pad. And now, an international crew is preparing for the 30th mission. One of the astronauts is André Kuipers of the Netherlands.
It was very cold. It was the coldest launch ever. And so they gave us special clothing around our necks because otherwise it would have been too cold for us. And then you walk forward and you see your family on the side, and they had a big banner. I did an effort to look where the family was and to read a bit what was on the banner. So that is nice. So I was not nervous. You train so much, you know, and you want to do this. Then astronauts are only worried that they might cancel the launch or something, and that doesn't happen much with Soyuz. So you feel pretty relaxed.
The Dutch ESA astronaut will be flying to the ISS, along with U.S. astronaut Don Pettit and Russian cosmonaut Oleg Kononenko.
You drive to the rocket, you see the rocket for the first time. You saw it in the factory, but you never saw it going out and being erected and fueled. So it's the first time you see the rocket, and it's beautiful because it's alive. You see all the condensation because of the cold fluids, and it's very impressive to see, oh, this is my rocket. And then you go up with the elevator, the same one. It's the same launch tower that Gagarin took, so it's also very historical.
This is André Kuipers' second trip to the ISS. He spent 9 days there in 2004. This time, he'll be staying for 5 months.
When you launch, it's shaking, noise. We cannot look outside, so we just follow procedures, look at the screens, and everything is okay. And before you know it, within 9 minutes, you are in orbit. That goes pretty fast, actually. It's a great moment.
It takes the crew 2 days to reach the ISS. André Kuipers is making it possible for us to tag along on this unique journey. The images he records will be the first ever 3D TV documentation of life in space.
Coming on board of the space station, that was different. I remember for my first flight when I came in, it smelled a bit oily, metal. But this time I came in a new Russian module, the MIM-1, and it was still smelling like a new car and very pristine, and the walls were clean, and so that was interesting to come on board that way. But I immediately felt at home, and I thought, hey, I know this, I've been here before.
U.S. astronaut Don Pettit, who also arrived together with André Kuipers, is on board the space station for the third time. They greet the commander, NASA astronaut Dan Burbank, who has already been on board for 4 weeks. He brought along his guitar.
So I floated everywhere I could. And then I went to the cupola, and that is our European-built watchtower, and it's fantastic. So you have windows all around. That's, of course, one of the first things I wanted to do, to see the planet. For me, it all started with my grandmother buying some science fiction booklets. And this was the Perry Rhodan series, originally German series, but it's also in Dutch. And I was hooked. I thought, wow, this is great, you know. It was about spaceships and alien planets, space suits, and all these kind of things. And I was reading in bed, you know, when I had to sleep with a flashlight under the blankets. I was reading my Perry Rhodan books. And but that was a boy's dream.
That dream has now come true for André Kuipers. Now it's time to get to work. Equipment is assembled for the task outside the station. These spacewalks last 6 hours. You can't just pop back in to grab a different screwdriver. Astronauts have to be all-round talents. That's the only way they can survive. André Kuipers is a medical doctor, but on board, he's a mechanic, scientist, and even a plumber. Even if it looks light and easy, weightlessness is a stressful condition for the body. The astronauts need 2 to 3 hours of physical fitness training each day. Weightlessness causes muscles and bones to atrophy. But how can you lift weights if there's no gravity? Engineers have created complicated sports equipment involving springs and vacuum hydraulics.
There's several ways to wash. You can use wet wipes. We have plenty of those on board, and you use it for everything. If you want some more water, you can indeed squeeze the water on you, and it just stays on you as a big bubble. You have to be careful that it doesn't get here, because you drown in a bubble of water. And in the beginning, it's strange, but after a while, you get used to it.
In the 1950s and 60s, the USA and the Soviet Union engaged in an unparalleled space race. The Cosmonaut Museum in Moscow honors the heroes of those days. For both superpowers, the battle was a political and ideological one. The first victory went to the Russians. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin orbited the Earth. He was stylized as a superhuman hero. It had been 4 years since the Sputnik shock of 1957. Shortly thereafter, the dogs Belka and Strelka became the first living creatures to return alive to Earth from outer space. Hidden in a forest is Synosti Gorodok, Star City, the fondly name of the formerly top-secret facility outside of Moscow. This is the facility where thousands lived and worked, at the training center of Soviet and later Russian cosmonauts. Alexander Gerst is training at the same facility where Yuri Gagarin prepared for his historic mission.
This is a place where you can feel how long and strong the Soviet space tradition is. There's a picture or statue of Yuri Gagarin on every corner, and there were actual guards posted at the gate, standing there with machine guns. Now it's a civilian facility. Yeah, you can stroll around and you really feel the old spirit of Soviet space travel. I love that about this place.
Our ESA astronaut is turning into a cosmonaut. The fabric of the spacesuit is simply gathered up and tied with 2 elastic bands. Hard to believe, but that's all it takes to withstand pressure, even in space. Regular training in Moscow is a very important part of Alexander Gerst's preparation. Since the last American space shuttle flight in the autumn of 2011, these Soyuz capsules are the only means anyone has to fly to the International Space Station. The Volkswagen Beetle of space, robust and reliable. That's what they call the Soyuz. It went into orbit for the first time in 1967 and have been launched nearly 140 times since then.
Today we practiced on the life support systems. One of them is the spacesuit I'm wearing now. You have to know how to use it, how to test it to ensure it's airtight, and what to do, for example, in case the pressure drops in the space station unexpectedly. Then, to protect against the danger of fire, you have to release all oxygen from the space capsule immediately. In fact, the decompression is even faster than what would happen in the case of a leak. It's a complex system. And when you're wearing a spacesuit, your body is under pressure, and you have to work under pressure, which isn't easy, and that's what we practiced today. You can definitely tell the difference between the 2 training systems between Russia and the USA. My training program here in Russia is very structured, divided into 2 unvarying intervals. That's because it was just developed that way here many years ago. All the training programs for the space station. And because they were so successful, they stuck with them. In America, they like to keep everything a little more flexible. They often add new classes that have been developed recently, and old ones are cancelled. But ultimately, I believe what's important is what they have in common. And that is, both countries have really shown that they're very skilled at space travel, and they know how to train astronauts and do so very successfully.
It only takes 90 minutes to orbit the Earth. Every day they are on board, the astronauts experience 16 sunrises and sunsets. The International Space Station has proved that countries that were enemies for most of the previous century can cooperate successfully. The International Space Station is the fulfillment of an ancient dream of mankind, to leave the planet to explore the unknown.
Here I am the subject of a neurological experiment, a neuropsychological experiment. So I have a cap on with EEG electrodes. They register all my brain waves. At the same time, I am doing all kind of tasks on a screen, but I cannot see the rest of the world. They want to see how that changes when you are weightless. So on the ground you do a lot of these tests. And then on board you do it, but then free floating. So you don't feel anything, your body is free, but you also don't see where you are. So it's a bit of a strange feeling, and I want to see how much that affects your performance on board.
André Kuipers is a physician. He is constantly performing medical experiments, often on himself. One of the focuses of his research is the study of diseases, for example, osteoporosis. Weightlessness causes atrophy of the bones. Although bone mass does return once astronauts return to Earth after a short trip, astronauts research experimental treatments for the time they spend in space. Laboratory samples are stored at temperatures of -80 degrees in the deep freeze on board the station. Our European astronauts are trained at the European Astronaut Center in Cologne. Alexander Gerst was selected from a pool of more than 8,400 candidates. ESA is not looking for daredevils, but professionals who are able to keep their cool even in extreme situations, and who are able to work in diverse scientific disciplines.
All in all, it's a big science kit we can use to construct all kinds of experiments we want to conduct in a highly sterile environment. What you see up here, these two optical modules, are a particular experiment investigating the diffusion of liquids under weightless conditions.
This centrifuge can create artificial gravity 5 times as strong as that on Earth. Alexander Gerst loves challenging himself to the extreme. Before he became an astronaut, he was a geophysicist who studied volcanoes. He worked on volcanoes in New Zealand and the Antarctic. The faster it turns, the more Alexander Gerst has the feeling he's standing straight. The researchers hope to create artificial gravity that will allow future astronauts to engage in physical fitness training in space.
You can certainly feel the blood traveling down.
It is hoped that someday in the future, it will be possible to better cope with the side effects of weightlessness. The ATV is an unmanned space transporter. ATV brings cargo to space and is piloted remotely. In case of an emergency, the astronauts on board need to be able to intervene in the docking procedure. It's always a tricky situation when spaceships dock onto the ISS. Maximum precautions are taken to ensure against a leak and prevent catastrophe. The ATV is Europe's biggest contribution to the International Space Station.
To understand the significance of the European Space Agency, you really just have to take a close look at the space station. 1/3 of the station's habitable modules were built in Europe. The space station relies on the European space transporter ATV, which prevents it from falling by always pushing it into a higher orbit, and brings supplies. We have a powerful booster rocket that's internationally renowned, the Ariane. And there's a European on board the space station about half the time. You can really tell that the Russian Space Agency and the American NASA see ESA as an international partner, and they really count on the ESA.
At NASA headquarters in Houston, Texas, Alexander Gerst is training in the world's largest indoor swimming pool. It holds 23.5 million liters of water and is more than 12 meters deep. In the pool is a life-size replica of the entire space station. Together with his American colleague, Alexander Gerst is getting ready for his first mission outside the space station. Later, the real thing will be very similar, but much more dangerous.
Of course, we know that a lot can go wrong. We've seen it in the past, and that's why our training program lasts so long. We have to be able to deal with all kinds of situations. We train procedures for many different emergencies, for anything that could happen. Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. And that's how we prevent ourselves from feeling we've lost control in case of an actual emergency. Because that's the feeling that causes people to be afraid, when we feel that we're no longer in control of a situation. And the long training program, tries to avoid just that.
For 6 hours without a break, Alexander Gerst practices under simulated weightless conditions. Later in space, the missions outside the station will take just as long. Divers are on hand for the astronauts' safety. The training session is observed from a control center that also gives the 2 astronauts instructions. It's a unique place to work. Nowhere else is it possible to so perfectly simulate weightless conditions and practice performing tasks on the space station's exterior.
From there, and that way I know I have a good indication when I'm working too hard. So if I get up into the 40s, for me personally, I'll be working too hard. Now your number may be 45 or whatever.
Part of the training involves unexpected problems that require the astronauts to improvise and come up with solutions.
Okay, the image uses the bad boys to sit up top here to my port side, correct? That's correct. All right, you're going to be doing port 1. All right, looking for what
EVA, extravehicular activity, is the official term for a spacewalk, a mission outside the space station. Later in space, the success or failure of these EVAs will be critical for the operation of the space station and the safety of the astronauts. They have to repair damage on their own or replace defective modules. Today, the instructors have planned a dangerous challenge for Alexander Gerst. NASA colleague Clayton Anderson receives instructions that Alexander Gerst cannot hear. The commands are issued by the control center.
My guess is you will see the RGMCs.
Yeah, I know.
They'll go a little past that.
The simulated emergency is a sudden loss of consciousness. Alexander Gerst has no idea what is happening. Clayton Anderson isn't reacting. That means mortal danger. Alexander Gerst must act quickly. The unconscious astronaut must be brought back into the space station as soon as possible. He only has a few moments' time, and if this were a real mission in space, it would mean the difference between life and death. After 6 hours, the training session is over.
Basically, it's like running a marathon the whole time. And when you're doing exercises like incapacitated crew member, where your colleague is unconscious and you have to get him back to the airlock as fast as possible, it really pushes your limits. I can tell, my hands, my muscles are exhausted, and basically it's like that every time I take off the suit.
The Hollywood blockbuster Star Wars inspired the design of these little satellites. Spheres is the name of the experiment. The satellites move in perfect synchronicity thanks to little jets of carbon dioxide.
These are independent devices that control their own position in space.
And the test is started.
They can sense where they are and also move around in a certain area. So they have all these little thrusters, like a little spaceship. And in weightlessness, they can control themselves. In the future, we might very well have, say, robot assistants that float with the astronauts and can provide them all kind of information on screens and maybe audio information while they have their hands free, for example. So it could be a little companion, who knows, that might be the future.
We're getting ready to do number 6. And Huntsville Station on to test number 5 is complete with
Oberpfaffenhofen near Munich, Germany, the control center of the European Space Agency, ESA. Mission Director Claudio Solazzo is in constant contact with André Kuipers and is preparing for his return. But then he gets a call from Moscow.
Yes. Okay, thanks. I understand. Tom, would you like to come here, please? Gustav. So we have a problem. I was just informed that the next Soyuz will not launch because it failed the test. We have to work on a new plan and on a contingency plan for. But my first reaction was that after having lost the shuttle, having problems with Soyuz, of course, would have been a big impact for the future of ISS. I mean, the Soyuz is now the only vehicle that can take astronauts back and forth from the ground up to the station and back. So that certainly was a big concern for the future. What will we do if Soyuz doesn't work properly anymore?
What happened? The Soyuz capsule intended to bring André Kuipers back to Earth was destroyed while undergoing tests in Moscow. At the moment, there is no other spaceship. How will the astronauts get back to Earth by their planned return date of May 16, 2012?
The main challenges were, of course, related first of all with health and safety of our crew on board. They live in a very harsh environment. The station is in space. Outside, the walls of Columbus or any of the other modules, there is empty space. There is no air, there is no protection from any source of radiation. And then, of course, logistics. It's a lot of extra work that needs to be done to plan providing provisions for the astronaut to leave more time on board.
There were numerous technical problems in the months before André Kuipers' launch.
When Progress 44P crashed, that was before our mission, then there was a serious issue because they didn't know what the problem was with the launcher. And we used the same type of stage as that Progress launcher. So there you want to be very sure that it is not a systematic error that happens in all the engines. Once we were on board after a while, then we heard there was another problem, and it was a test with the next Soyuz capsule that got overpressurized. And when I heard it, I thought, this means something for us. Claudio Solazzo gave me all the information, what was going on and what it meant for me and the mission.
Everyone in the control center of the Russian space agency Roscosmos is working under extreme pressure to come up with a solution. Aborted launches, crashes, interruptions, and postponements. In the past few months, there have been numerous mishaps on the Russian side. It's a highly sensitive political issue. Is the reputation of the Russian Space Agency for reliability in danger?
I think the worries are more on the side of the Russian system, the Russian Roscosmos, because they had several events in a row, and of course people started to raise eyebrows about quality control on the side of Energia and Roscosmos.
There are 2 Soyuz capsules docked onto the space station, but if they were to use both of them, there would no longer be any astronauts on board. For critics, this would be a welcome opportunity to demand the end of the billion-dollar space station. A training facility outside of Moscow. Practice for another kind of emergency. Alexander Gerst commutes constantly between Houston, Cologne, and Moscow, preparing for his mission in May 2014. Together with his Russian and American colleagues, he is practicing a splashdown in the Soyuz capsule. This training program used to be carried out under realistic conditions in the Black Sea. But in light of budget cuts, some improvisation is now required to simulate waves. The astronauts spend several hours in the cramped, hot capsule.
Ideally, of course, you touch down on the landing pad in the plains of Kazakhstan, and that's usually what happens, a pinpoint landing there. But of course, you have to be prepared for emergencies. For example, there might be a leak in an oxygen tank or fuel tank while you're in space. And then you have to immediately return to the Earth's atmosphere. And that means you might end up just about anywhere on the planet between 52 degrees north and 52 degrees south. And that might also be in the water. And that's what we have to be prepared for.
Meanwhile, in Oberpfaffenhofen, they found a way to get André Kuipers back to Earth. But he'll have to stay on board for 7 more weeks.
I was very confident from the beginning that we would find a solution, and we worked it out. So we had to consider what would happen to the successive flights, what would happen to the logistics on board, because keeping, let's say, a crew of 6 for 1.5 months more clearly implies we need more air to breathe, we need more food, we need a lot more sustainability items.
So, a new Soyuz will bring the crew back to Earth later.
Failure in this case is not an option, as a very famous flight director from NASA said during the flight of Apollo 13. And that is history which remains with us as well.
There is much rejoicing on board. The astronauts will stay in space for 7 extra weeks before the Soyuz capsule that was destroyed during testing in Moscow can be replaced.
I think it was the right decision. I was never worried for myself, not for the crew. I felt sorry for the next crew because their expedition would be shorter. So from that point of view, yeah, I thought, well, for us it's good because we can stay longer. At least we liked it. It could be the other way around. But the others have, yeah, they have bad luck.
In addition to routine checks, André Kuipers will conduct numerous experiments in the weeks to come, all of which are actually part of the subsequent cruise program. The control center for the European Space Transporter ATV is located in Toulouse, in southern France.
ATV flight, Houston flight. Okay, I need your go for rendezvous station.
The unmanned space transporter took off a week ago to bring supplies to the ISS. The docking maneuver will be controlled from here and is scheduled to take place tonight. Tension is high in the control center.
101, MCC Houston is ready for rendezvous initiation. Just be aware that we are currently still locking.
Il y a des phases qui sont très critiques.
There are some very critical phases. The first is at 39 kilometers. That's a very critical moment because that's when the ATV first commences electronic communication with the station. A dialogue must be established and it must take place on time. The satellite is moving towards the station very fast and we only have 20 minutes to ensure the communication is working. If that doesn't happen, the rendezvous can't take place.
Et si ce n'est pas le cas, le rendez-vous ne pourra pas avoir lieu.
Beginning of block 6 of
The docking maneuver is computer controlled. Meter by meter, the 20-ton space transporter glides toward the station. The team in Toulouse is in constant contact with the control centers in Moscow and Houston.
Il est tout à fait prévu que les astronautes à bord de la station.
In point of fact, the astronauts on board are intended to monitor everything and intervene to influence the ATV's behavior if needed. Although they can't reprogram the ATV, they do monitor its approach. They make sure the ATV maneuvers within its safe approach corridor, which is safe for the station and astronauts. If the ATV departs from the safe approach corridor, they can abort the rendezvous.
À ce moment-là, ils ont la possibilité d'annuler le rendez-vous.
Allez, top, 11 mètres.
This animation shows the precision with which the engineers work to ensure the space transporter can dock onto the station.
ATV flight 172800. Dynamics repeats 172800. Correct.
Mission accomplished.
Boom, contact.
Contact capture.
Allez.
Relief. The unmanned space transporter has docked onto the International Space Station. Now, there's hard work to do for the crew on board. It takes 15 hours before they can finally open the hatch to the space station.
Whenever there is a spaceship coming, there is a possibility of debris, things floating loose, maybe sharp metal particles or something like that. Then it's always wise to just put on goggles and masks just to be sure. But like now with ATV, I mean, you open the hatch, you may notice that it's very clean, there's nothing floating. and the air smells good, and so it's a very nice spaceship, ATV. So that was okay. It's just a safety precaution.
The space transporter has delivered a cargo of more than 6.5 tons. It will undock again in 6 months, filled with refuse. It will burn up upon re-entering the Earth's atmosphere.
ATV brings a lot of interesting items. It brings new equipment, it brings food, clothes, special care packages for the crew, consumables, all kind of things that the crew needs, be it for experiments, be it for living on board.
The final weeks of André Kuipers' space adventure are at hand. Instead of 5 months as originally planned, he has been in space for more than half a year.
I spent the last days a lot of time at the window at night when everybody was already asleep. I curled up in the cupola and so the whole Earth under me, and it was fantastic. Complete orbits and beautiful thunderstorms, and you see all the different star systems come up, the constellations, and then the planets going up, Jupiter, Venus, and then I saw the moon, and then the sunrise. We had northern light even on those last orbits.
And then, on July 1st, 2012, it's time to say goodbye.
The return in the Soyuz is the most exciting part of the flight. People mostly think of the launch, but returning is very exciting. Somewhere above Iraq, Turkey, we enter the atmosphere, and you see that because it becomes pink outside, and then orange, and you see sparks, and then all of a sudden you get heavier and heavier. 1, 2, 3 times, 4 times, 4.7 times our body weight. So it's hard to breathe. So for several minutes we are in this fireball, being squeezed in our seats, and then you brace for the impact, and then you see a big flash, and then you hit the ground. It's a small car accident, and it's very wild. You move, my knee hit the dashboard, and we tipped over so for a moment, and then we came up right again. If you come out of the capsule after half a year, it feels really strange. It feels like a magnet is pulling on you. You see also that we are pretty pale, so say the blood pressure reflexes are down. But I felt good enough to recognize people and to wave and to make a phone call. So also I realized that people were, of course, worried, but I could smile, and so back on the planet.
It's an adventure that Alexander Gerst is still looking forward to.
For me, one of the primary motivations for wanting to fly to space was this curiosity I have. I want to find things out, not just new technologies and new scientific discoveries, which in my view would by themselves be sufficient to justify space travel, but also this other feeling of going beyond borders to see what's in our Earth's neighborhood. We've been venturing into space for 50 years. When you think about it, how much we've achieved in those 50 years. We've been to the moon and other heavenly bodies. We have a space station in orbit above the Earth where we can live, research, work. We human beings are such a curious and inquisitive species. We won't ever stop looking for answers. Of that, I'm certain.